Another constellation? Come on! Hey guys, it's Nico from Steel City Vintage, and yes, another constellation. But if it's being featured on this series, you know that it's not any old constellation. And before we get into it, this is a perfect watch to bring up the importance of hallmarks. Hallmarks are little indentations, usually depictions of something, whether it be a face, an animal, something like that, on the case that'll let you know a little bit about the watch. And if you're a nerd like me, that's stuff that for whatever reason interests you, because I love to read about the history of where a watch came from, where it was made. Somebody took pride in making that, so they put their casemaker stamp on that and things like that. And those things can provide you clues about what it is that you're looking at. So for this watch, it is an Omega Constellation encased in 18 karat yellow gold. So already a little bit special off the bat, because they didn't make a majority of their watches in precious metal. Only select few, by Omega standards, select few watches in all precious metal. But if we take a look at the lugs, especially in this picture that you'll see here, there are two stamps. And these stamps will indicate to you that this constellation was in fact produced in London. Now, as you guys know, I am a huge fan of Cartier, and in my opinion, London being the pinnacle of that mountain, it's not very often that we get to see an Omega Constellation made by a case produced in London. In fact, this is the first one that I've come across in person. Obviously, I've seen pictures and read stories online, but in person, this is the first one I've ever had the opportunity to be blessed enough to handle. So what's this story? Well, if we look at the case back, we can see this fancy S. Now, right off the bat, doesn't really mean anything. After a little digging, I found out that this was a maker's mark that signified the case was made by a gentleman named David Shackman. Now, David Shackman founded his company in London in 1915 and then first registered his hallmarks with the London Assay Office in the year 1922. He started off making fine jewelry, as a lot of these case makers originally started, before then graduating or transitioning, at least allocating part of his company to making precious metal wristwatches, which he did for companies like Longines, Rolex, and Omega. Now, what this means is it's likely that the movement was produced in Switzerland by Omega, obviously, and then that movement was imported into England to then be encased by David Shackman for sale in the domestic market. Now, Omega, like other companies, would do these types of practices in order to avoid heavy import duties on watches that were already made and encased in gold, and there were heavy duties, taxes that were levied against them. A lot of companies did that. Now, from a paper written by a gentleman named Andrew Romaine, who goes on to cover British Constellation cases that were made in gold, he states that this specific reference, the 168.5004, is very similar to the other constellation design aesthetic, the 168.004, the omission of the 5. Pretty much identical. That was a reference that was produced by a company called Denison from the years 1963 to 1967, at which point Shackman then took over and continued to produce that watch. Now, specifically regarding this reference and the one that's identical to it, that's a lot more common, the one with the .004 and omission of 5, it's a pretty cool constellation for the simple fact that although the case diameter is relatively identical to other constellations of the past, its diameter may be the same but looks bigger due to the thinner bezel. So having that thinner bezel gives a lot more dial real estate, and I do in fact believe that the dial is actually a little bit larger, so it does wear a little bit bigger on the wrist from that design standpoint. For all intents and purposes, yeah, Constellation's, you know, obviously not the rarest watch out there, especially when you consider other watches that we've featured on this channel, but relative to what Omega has made, I think that this one's a really interesting one, and rightfully so, did sell pretty quickly from our vintage watch shop. But I did want to give some history on the piece and talk about it, because I really got excited when I saw it. I hadn't seen anything like that in person before, and thought I would share. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.